Hi, Jess. Thanks for joining. It's amazing
Cool new
to have you.
platform. I've never used this before.
Yeah, welcome to Jitsi and welcome to the Women Techmakers group.
Great.
So, maybe so I'll just quickly introduce you. I met Jess at Imperial College where we both did our PhDs. So Jess is a British physicist. She's working in the field of material science, and I believe she did her PhD at Imperial, and now she's still working there in the Blackett in the physics department.
Indeed.
But she's super active in public engagement activities, especially in gender diversity and equality in science and technology subjects. And so, for example, what it was really impressive that you have made just like hundreds of Wikipedia pages for women that are really achieved a lot of achievements in these subjects. So that's impressive. And so Jess really is super active in public engagement, and she has received various awards and medals for this work. Like last year. Yeah, okay.
Too much embarrassing things now.
It's impressive. So
I'm with my parents at the moment, so I can get my mum to come down and do the whole. She's won this. She can bring them all down. So thank you so much.
It's impressive. Thanks for joining.
Okay, and now I just try and work out if I can share a screen so I can do.
Yes, you should be able to share it left on the bottom left. There's a little share your screen.
Cool. Okay, I can just share my application window. Nice. So if I go into present play from some, can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to talk kind of maybe I'll try and talk for like 20 minutes, but if I talk for too long, then please interrupt me. And if you have any questions throughout, you can just interrupt me and ask me any questions. So as was mentioned, I work in physics. I work on new materials for electronic devices, particularly trying to make new materials for light emitting diodes. And I'm thinking a lot about how molecular structure impacts the electronic properties of the materials, but also the kind of optical properties. So how we can make materials that emit circularly polarized light is really my big obsession. But outside of that, I'm really involved with public engagement, as was mentioned in the introduction, and particularly different initiatives to try and kind of improve gender equality in science. And I think I've been doing this probably since the beginning of my PhD. And I think that, you know, it became more and more apparent to me as I moved through Imperial, the underrepresentation of women and really the lack of diversity as a whole. Not only women are underrepresented, but also people of color are underrepresented, especially in subjects like physics and computer science and engineering. And I think it's quite kind of stark when you look at numbers for it. So I hope we've got the right numbers up here. So in the UK, we take subjects at the end of high school called A-levels. We take exams called A-levels even. And if any of you know people in the UK education system, we make young people make choices really, really early. So at the age of about 15, they choose 3 or 4 subjects that are going to define them for the next 2 years. And then after that, you choose one subject, which is the subject that you're going to do at university. So really, when we take our A-levels, we're taking those subjects alongside 2 other subjects. So someone might do maths, physics, and chemistry or something like that, but that's it. That's all they can study. And we've known for a really, really long time that girls are very underrepresented there. So young women make up only 1 in 5 of physics A-level students. We know it's pretty similar for computer science. So this underrepresentation of girls and then women happens really, really early on. It's not just when they get to university. It's something much, much more significant in society. This is pretty common in most countries that let people choose subjects early on. And in America, it happens a little bit later because they study almost everything until they get to university. But we've known this in the UK for a really, really long time. Not sure what that 3 is for. Oh, because that's how many subjects you take for A-level. The other thing that we know, which makes it incredibly unfair, is that you're much, much more likely to study physics if you go to an all-girls high school. So we don't have a huge number of these. It's about 6% of the population who go to an all-girls high school, but you're much, much more likely to study physics at them if you do. So we don't only have an issue of this huge gender imbalance in the subjects that kids study when they're kind of 15, 16 years old, but it's also kind of racialized because it's very white to study subjects like physics and computer science. And then it's also very classist because it's only students who are quite privileged who have the opportunity to study these things. And usually that's because of the quality of their teacher. So I started thinking about all of these different aspects of how kind of unfair British education had become when I was during my PhD, and I started trying to do more and more things to try and encourage and improve gender balance. And then I just started to think about it, and actually probably lots of you or lots of the people you know do a lot of this public engagement as well, particularly around science. And I was thinking about it more and more, and there's so many people in the UK who try, there's so much money spent on it, and yet we don't see it having the huge impact that we want it to have. There's a really great report by the Royal Academy of Engineering that came out a couple of years ago that I'll share it with you later on if you're interested. But this looks at the kind of science and technology, engineering and maths education landscape in the UK. So it's all of the people who are doing things for STEM activities, so kind of fun science activities, computer science activities, education providers, all of the engineering sectors, so all of the different professional bodies for engineering, all of these different groups, and how many they were and how many people were trying to be active. And what you can kind of see in the top left is in diversity, we have an awful lot of providers who are trying to do things for diversity. So you have 6 shown here on the screen and then 10 more. But when you come down to something like science activities, we have all of this long list and then like 300 plus additional. So we don't only have all of this effort and time being spent on it, huge amount of money going into it, and not a lot changing. So not a lot changing on the diversity of people who are studying the subject, or really the numbers of kids who are thinking about doing science. And so I think particularly for the gender, for trying to increase the representation of women in engineering and physics, the way we've approached it has kind of been wrong. So we've tried really hard to make science pink. It's kind of like, we'll make it pink and then the girls will come because we'll make it pink. This was in 2012. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. It's very funny. So it's these kind of, it was made by the European Commission, but it's these 3 girls dancing around, and they maybe watch it later on if you haven't seen it.
Oh my God.
It's really hilarious. And this was huge investment to make this video. And they're kind of dancing. It wasn't only 53 seconds long. I think this is the clip that still remains on YouTube. And this was this idea that if young girls saw this, it would completely change their perspective about studying physics or engineering. And I think the interesting thing is, this was like 8-9 years ago now, and we haven't really learned. We keep doing it. We keep making all of these different initiatives that are kind of like incredibly pink for girls and not so much for boys. And I think that what we need to get to as a society is one where we don't try and separate things more. It doesn't have to be pink engineering or physics to make a girl want to study it. Similarly, it doesn't have to be blue engineering or physics to make a boy want to study it, but we just haven't got there yet. That was in 2012. Remind me to tell you that. This was I don't know if you saw this over Christmas. This was, someone put this on Twitter. I just thought it was so funny. It was from the Lego magazine. So Lego have made these kind of disgusting sets of Lego called Lego Friends, and Lego Friends is for girls and Lego City is for boys or something like that. And this was the discussion in the Lego magazine that accompanied Lego Friends, which is just so horrific. What a load of scientific jargon. Boring, it's time to do some baking. Yeah, let's bring some fun in here. I think this part's also really great. I think we should secretly go to the meeting too, just in case Carter tries to do something. They have some little life, these Lego characters. Yeah, you're right, but we wouldn't be able to just walk in. A group of girls among researchers will stick out like sore thumbs. So I became very interested in this. Why are we trying to do all of this different pinkifying science? Because it's obviously not working. And this is another kind of classic thing that you see a lot of. We also have this idea, and certainly when I was doing my PhD, I kind of fell into this category a lot, that if we had kind of one-off shiny, incredible speakers come and talk to them at lunchtime, that would change a school's whole perception of doing a subject. And I think I've come to realize now that people going into high schools, people giving all of these talks, can impact the people in the room who are already quite close to being converted. You go in and you speak about physics or you speak about chemistry, and all the kids who are already quite excited about that are like yeah, I'm still pretty excited about that. And so I'm not sure how much impact it can have on people who are really, really far away from making that decision, is what I'm trying to say, not very eloquently. And the last thing we try and do is try and push these stereotypes even more. And this happens so much in kids' books now. It's kind of got a bit frustrating. So there's been a discussion about stereotypes. People got a bit unhappy that they were happening. And then now we've gone and made science really pink. We've got these different books for girls and these different books for boys. And it's kind of gone back to separating people again. You know, it's not just you go in and see these beautiful books about planets or these great things about dinosaurs or stuff like that. It's very much at the moment, especially when you go into the bookstores in the UK, like it's all really, really distinct and separate. And I think it is just that thing that even with all of this investment and all of this time spent on trying to do public engagement, when you look at numbers of kids who are studying particular subjects, nothing's really changed at all. You can actually study it for a really long way in the UK because we have huge access to student education data. I'm just going to show you two before I talk to you a little bit about Wikipedia. But this is an overwhelming graph. I didn't make it, so forgive me. But this is differences in boys and girls' choices at high school. So these are those exams I told you about before that we take at kind of 15, 16 years old. We take these, you used to take them twice at 17 and 18, but now you just take them at 18. But the kind of darker purple is women taking them, and the paler blue is men taking them. And you can see way down here in the women-dominated part of the graph, you have subjects like drama, weirdly Welsh, no idea why, and then also sociology and art and design. And then way up here in the boy-dominated part of the graph, you have kind of computing and physics and further maths and economics, and all of these different subjects are quite important for making money later on. So this was in 2013, 2012. So this was when, 8 years ago when they made that discussing video. Since then, we've had all of this huge, huge investment in trying to get boys and girls, well, girls particularly, to study science. And this was the graph from last year. So they've made it a different aspect ratio, the nice company who put out this information, but you can still see it's the same. We still have drama really dominated by girls, or similarly Welsh. I'm not sure why it's been split into first and second language. And then up here at the other end, you have computing, physics, further maths, economics, DT, PE slipped back a bit. So that's the only one that's changed. But we really haven't changed anything up here. So I was thinking more and more about how old-fashioned the way that we expect young kids to engage with science education and science. We think we can put cool role models in a textbook, or we can get people to go to a high school and give a talk, when really young people are getting so much more information online now, and they're learning and interacting with people in so many different ways to the ones that we as grown-ups can really understand. And I just think that, and probably I can argue with people who do a lot of this kind of school public engagements and have these discussions about it, but I think that we kind of fundamentally are, as scientists, as grown-up scientists, as adults, like a bit naive about how we try and attract these young people. Another thing that we have that's a really difficult aspect of science, which I'm sure you discuss a lot at these kind of evenings and think about a lot, and hopefully we'll talk about in the next talk as well, is the way that women are treated by academia and by science in general. So on the one hand, we have not enough getting to young people, not enough information getting to young people because we're putting it in the wrong places, we're doing it in a really old-fashioned way. And on the other hand, we're not celebrating the women who are working in science enough. So we're not talking about them enough, we're not giving them enough awards, we're not making it easy for them to be able to feel recognized and valued by the discipline that they're in. So we have one side, which is really this issue of this underrepresentation of girls choosing subjects that would let them come and study, physics, computing, engineering, maths at university. And then on the other side, we're not doing enough to keep those women who have made that decision, keep them and make them become professors and make them win prestigious awards and make them have these huge, incredible research groups. So I've kind of been balancing and thinking about that for a really, really long time, as I'm sure a lot of you have done as well. And then I read this really phenomenal book called Inferior by Angela Saini. Again, I think some of you will have read this. I'm hoping some of you might have read this. If you haven't, I fully recommend you read it. So it's called Inferior, The True Power of Women and the Science That Shows It. And Angela is an engineer turned science writer. She's a kind of journalist. She does all of these great kind of investigative journalism. So goes and finds a really cool story and then interviews a whole bunch of people to try and work out what happened. And largely focuses on science because she has a training in science. But this book came out of a bunch of studies she'd done looking at the differences between biological differences between men and women and what that impacted in personalities, in the way that women grow up and the way that they interface with society. And what she found in writing this book was that there was a whole bunch of studies that came out in the kind of late 80s and early 90s, neuroscience studies that had really been quite significant in saying that women should have a more inferior role in society to men. So there'd been a whole range of neuroscience that had been set up in a biased way. The experiments themselves had been biased. The way they were interpreted was biased. And as a result, it really impacted women's standing in society. So that's relatively recent, the last kind of 20, 30 years. But she goes back and looks at all of these different times throughout history that women have been told that they're intellectually inferior to men. And it's just quite staggering, actually, to see it through a completely neutral, impartial scientist. She's trying to work it out and trying to understand. I think at the outset of writing this book, she just wanted to know whether there were any differences and whether they were statistically meaningful differences, and if those differences could result in the very unequal world that we have that I've already discussed, or the unequal women in leadership positions. And what she finds out is actually the experiments that have told us that there are these huge differences are super, super biased. And it's just this fascinating read. And I think I mean, I can probably do a whole talk on why it's so great, but one aspect of it that I think is so good is that she teaches you all of these different areas of science that I couldn't appreciate or have understood without her guiding you through it. So things about how you interpret fMRI scans and how you discuss the results. I think it's fascinating. Anyway, another amazing and important thing that happened was I met this phenomenal woman called Alice White, and Alice taught me about, I think I've got a little picture of her. Alice taught me about editing Wikipedia. Oh, here she is, looking beautiful. And particularly how important Wikipedia is in a way that I really, really hadn't thought about before, and something that, you know, how often it's used. I think English-speaking Wikipedia is used usually about 32 million times a day. There was a day a couple of weeks ago. At the moment, it's being used hugely for various reasons. One of them because everyone's trying to find out about coronavirus, and the other because I think more than half of kids in the world are currently being homeschooled. So it's suddenly become this phenomenally important resource. And typically it's about 32 million times a day. I think there was one day last week when it was 650 million across all the Wikipedia language platforms, so all of the different websites. So phenomenally important resource. And particularly important, I think, interestingly, for high schools and teachers, for undergraduate education, and also for journalists. So a lot of the time, journalists will use Wikipedia to find out the background of a topic, but also to look up experts to come in to speak about a particular topic. So Wikipedia is very important. As scientists, I think it's fascinating how important it is for science as well. There's a great paper on it. If you want me to send it to you, I will. But it was looking at how Wikipedia is influential, particularly in interdisciplinary science. So how, especially if you're starting off in a new area, you know, if I'm trained as a physicist, but I want to work with some new materials that show particular kind of property, I might have to read about that property or the materials. And sometimes you start on Wikipedia. But there was an academic at MIT who assigned a kind of Wikipedia project to his class, where he got everyone in the class to write about a kind of emerging area of chemistry, and then tracked how often those areas came up in scientific literature, and could assign 1 in 300 peer-reviewed published papers, 1 in 300 words to them being on these Wikipedia pages, which I just think is so cool. So hugely important in high school education, in every other aspect of our lives, in journalism, and also in academia. And I think something really interesting about Wikipedia is it doesn't only inform things in a very obvious way. So obviously we can see when we sit down and search for something on the website, or if we're using it in a class or something like that, you know you're using Wikipedia. But actually it comes through in a very subtle way as well. So we see it in, if you ask Siri a question, if you ask Amazon Alexa a question, or if you ask Google Home a question, all of the answers that these home assistants get come to you because that question has an answer on Wikipedia. So if you go to Siri and you ask a question about an obscure football team in the north of England, Siri will know the answer because that page, that team has a Wikipedia page. Similarly, if you ask Google Images to show you a picture of a famous physicist, it comes up with a lovely wall of old famous physicists, all of whom are men. And that's because all of these physicists have Wikipedia pages. They have Wikipedia pages with images on, which means that they have the right licenses to be shared freely online. Yes, that's what Wikipedia images are. And they float to the top of any Google search. So not only is Wikipedia influencing a lot of our lives in very obvious ways, but also in really, really subtle ways as well. And I think it's kind of, you know, that this is one of many things that prompted me and motivated me to start editing. So as was mentioned before, I've been editing for 2 years. So I started in 2018. And I started because Wikipedia has two quite big problems when you think about diversity. So one is the underrepresentation of women who edit. It's about 90% men. So we have a really, really big underrepresentation in the kind of people who are editing Wikipedia. I think it's a huge, I mean, I know it's a very biased to the Northern Hemisphere, and it's also very biased towards North America. So the majority of editors are white men in North America, and the majority of pages, the majority of biographies, you know, about 80% of the biographies are about men too. I think this is fascinating, actually, and I put these up to remind me to tell you, this 1 in 5 is very similar to the representation that we've had in the UK of women on banknotes and also of women in statues. So we have this kind of limit on where we're going to get to better celebrate women. You know, 51% of the population, but 1 in 5 of the Wikipedia pages, 1 in 5 of all of the statues around the UK, and 1 in 5 of the people on banknotes. But I've been editing for you know, just over 2 years now. And I've written almost 1,000 biographies, which is just amazing. And they're the most incredible people. I was thinking about it earlier today. Like, sometimes someone will just say someone and I'll know I've made their Wikipedia page, and you have this very bizarre knowledge. You remember exactly who they are. You remember all these strange things about people's lives. I'll just tell you about one before we go to have a chat. No, maybe I'll tell you about a couple. So this is Gladys West, and she was fascinating to me as both the kind of thinking about equality and diversity in people who are just trailblazers in their own field, but also in putting this page together, because something quite wonderful about a Wikipedia page, which feels very different to academic publishing, is that you started off, you write it. I sit here and I, you know, after dinner, sit down and write a Wikipedia page, and it may have a little bit of information on. When I wrote this page about Gladys West, there wasn't a huge amount of publicly available information you could get. She was born in the 1930s, and she ended up working for the government. So she worked on kind of early developments of GPS technology. She actually studied maths first. And then she went on and had this kind of phenomenal career working in tech and having this really big impact on something that we've come to, you know, everyone in the world has come to rely on so much. But when I wrote it, you really couldn't find out that much information. You could just find these kind of old documents that all had images that were redacted and, you know, secret information that we couldn't know because it was the government. But since I wrote this, so, you know, now she's basically 90. But since I've written this, she's finished her PhD by distance learning. So at the age of 90, she's finished her PhD. She's also been inducted into the US Air Force Hall of Fame. So now there are all of these beautiful images of her that are free to use online because the government give all of their media, I think, is free to use on Wiki Commons. And then she's been appointed to the BBC's Top 100 Women, which is just so cool. So you kind of make a Wikipedia page of someone who's 90, and you think they're 90, not much will happen from now until, you know, for the future. But actually, amazing things keep happening, which is just incredible. Something I've been working on for the past couple of months is really trying to represent the women who are working on coronavirus-related topics on Wikipedia. So this is Kizzy Corbett, who is the lead immunologist at the National Institute of Health for designing and developing one of the coronavirus vaccines. I think they're just about to start clinical trials. Sara Gilbert is the UK-based vaccinologist who is working on one of the other coronavirus vaccines, which actually started clinical trials today, which is so cool. So both of these are quite fascinating because my dad's been watching, I mean, we've all been watching a lot of news, and both times he's come down and said, do you know this Kizzy Corbett? And he'd been reading the Wikipedia page I'd written, which is so cool. This is Alison McGee. Amazing when you start to research this. There's a lot of women who work in public health and epidemiology, and actually a huge number of Canadian women. So Alison McGee is one of these many incredible Canadian women, and she's looking at aerosol transmission of coronavirus and how it survives in air. And this is Paula Reid, who, if any of you have been watching the catastrophic press conferences that Trump has been doing, Paula Reid's the news correspondent for CBS, who's been really, really holding him to account. So I guess I don't want to talk for too long, but the most incredible thing about this whole project, and we've done a whole bunch of teaching with high schools across the country as well, is that it costs nothing. Editing Wikipedia costs $0, £0. It costs absolutely nothing to do. And yet you impact and interact and talk about people so much. You know, the page that I wrote, the page about Kizzy Corbett, after she was on CNN or something like that, it got 50,000 views in one night. The page I wrote about Katie Bauman, if you remember, the computer scientist who helped develop who helped to create the first direct image of a black hole, that page, over the 2 days after the code went online and the images were on all of our newspapers, that got 350,000 page views. The number of people who read this is absolutely staggering. And I think probably at the moment, it's more important than ever before that we have this really easy access, easy to understand way to translate information to the public. So from that side, I'm very, very passionate about getting more people involved with editing and thinking about how we can use it more as a resource. And actually, as researchers, as people who are interested in tech, like everyone here, it's a really incredibly open source of data. Wikipedia, they share almost everything. If I want to check who's reading a page, where they're reading it, how many people have edited it, what other things those people edit, you can find out so much. So even from a scientific side, studying Wikipedia is just absolutely fascinating. But anyway, I should end now and stop asking questions. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you for having these kind of events, because I think they're all really, really important. So I'm going to stop sharing now. If you have anything, maybe ask a couple of questions now, and then if you have anything else, you can just send me an email or on Twitter.
Cool. Thanks loads for joining. I think this is super inspiring for everyone. So Jess has a couple of minutes. So if you guys have some questions, it's time now.
Can I have a question?
Of course.
So you said that 10% of people that are editing Wikipedia are women. How well is this defined, this number? Because you don't need to tell, right?
Exactly right. You don't know. That's from Wikipedia surveys that they've done. They do these surveys of editors quite regularly, but obviously you have no idea, and you don't know really where people are in the world, and not everyone will respond to a survey. Something I think is quite interesting is that I've done editathons. If we weren't in a pandemic, we've done editathons almost every week since I started editing, you know, somewhere in the world, sometimes remotely, sometimes in person, sometimes at high schools, sometimes at conferences. And there's always so many women who come to learn how to edit Wikipedia. So it's very, you know, when you're in that kind of environment, they're there, and then people don't stay. So there's something about the community side of Wikipedia which doesn't feel, you know, it's not like this. It's not it's not comforting and welcoming. And that's something I think is quite interesting. You know, it's not just a content on Wikipedia. It's also how we change that community to make it one that's more inclusive and makes people want to stay.
Yeah. Thanks.
Cool.
So maybe I'll have. Oh, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
No. Okay, quickly. Oh no, you go. Please go first.
Please go.
Okay, so this Women Techmakers group Nuremberg is just starting. Do you have any tip on how to build our community? Anything practical?
I think maybe do things like, I don't know if you ever have book clubs or something like that, but if you have an opportunity to read books and to talk about a book, people get really engaged and enthused about that. If you can have suggestions about that. Another group that I'm in is one where people who are interested in popular science writing come together and share things that they're writing. So lots of them are people who are writing popular science books. So maybe it's, you know, sleep scientists who are writing a book about sleep. And they share that, and everyone then kind of discusses it. So it could be something you're writing for a magazine, you know, non-technical writing. Not everyone wants to read the paper that you're working on. But I think that kind of thing where people feel it's just a really fascinating discussion. Obviously, you have some people who just come and talk, and you do Q&As with them afterwards. But I think book groups are really, really incredibly popular, and also that idea of kind of more informal peer review. But then my brother did a quiz. My brother had a pub quiz on Zoom the other day, and he said it was amazing. Like, it went on for 2 hours and everyone got so into it and so competitive. So maybe it could just be a quiz.
Cool. Thanks.
We had also today a pub quiz at our company, a virtual pub quiz. This was really great with Menti. I've never thought that it worked so well, but
that's really cool. I've seen some people use it in teaching. I have to teach optics next week, so maybe I have to come up with some creative ways to do that.
Yeah, I also have a question. I hope it wasn't already answered because I missed the first question. But how do you get your like inspiration, or which woman is next, so to say?
So at the moment it's very different. Usually I just go through who's won an award recently, who's become a fellow of somewhere recently. Sometimes if I've not got enough, you know, I don't want to end up just writing about white women scientists, because I'm very aware that they're, you know, even if we know women are underrepresented, but we know people of color are much more underrepresented. So I'm really aware of that all the time. And so sometimes it means that I just end up going through academic profiles on university pages, a huge amount. But sometimes I'll see them speaking at a conference, or sometimes I'll read a paper by someone. Or often now, because I've spoken about Wikipedia so much, people will send me a suggestion. So they'll be like, hey, this is my aunt. She's really cool. Or some people are like, oh, I deserve a Wikipedia page. And I'm like, you are so arrogant. You definitely do not. But so sometimes I find them, sometimes they come to me. And then at the moment, because I'm really just trying to write about coronavirus related researchers, mainly because every time I read an article in US or UK news, it's all quoted male experts. And there are so many women who are working on it. So at the moment, I have this big spreadsheet with my friend who works at the AAAS in America, and we just, every time we're on Twitter or we watch the news or something like that, we hear about a woman, we add her to that sheet. And I can see we're working through, we had about 65, and now I'd say there's about 10 left. So we're going through each day and adding more. But so sometimes it's quite systematic and organized like that. When I've done them, if you're interested in editing in any way, we can catch up a long time afterwards. But when I've had these editathons with learned societies, when we've done it at conferences, the kind of comms team from the society have spent some time putting together a list beforehand, and that's so useful. So we did one at the APS, at the American Physical Society meeting, one at a Photonics Society, and there they made a list of all the recent fellows who were women or from the global south and things like that, and then it made it so much easier. So there are different ways that you
think this is a super good idea. We should make an event that's an editathon and make such a list beforehand.
It's so good. And, you know, for a lot of people, especially like scientists and engineers, sometimes aren't that extrovert. Like, it's a really nice thing to do at a conference because you just sit down. Everyone's kind of there for the same cause. Everyone's a good person, but they get to do something good and meaningful. And sometimes people buy you all beer or drinks or food or snacks, but it's really fun to do. Anyway, I should go now. So have a very nice evening.
Thanks loads.
Thanks for having me. And happy quarantine to you. Bye.
People are asking if you could share the resources, the materials that you mentioned.
I'll send it to you.
I'll pass it on. Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thank you.